So let me just introduce a little bit about Vivian Young. Vivian has over 15 years of leadership experience in the financial service industry. Previously, she was at Charles Schwab's as an advisor services and the U.S. Trust Company of New York. In her current role at JPMorgan, she's responsible for developing a leading global unified strategy to advance equity and inclusion for the Asian and Pacific Islander community.
Time delay.
Oh no, I'm getting excellent.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. Hope you had a good lunch and you enjoyed our panels this morning. Let me call up my panelists. We'll start with Sara to my right or to your left. Harish, Xihao, and then Jenny. Big round of applause for my panelists today. We are thrilled to welcome you for this dynamic and lively discussion that we're going to have around ERGs. We have 4 leaders up here that are extremely passionate about this topic. So hopeful to give you some really good takeaways after our 40 minutes discussion. So that what we would cover today is ERG structure, the evolution of ERGs within each of their organizations, the roles of sponsors and allies, and then we will wrap it up by giving each of you one best practice about managing and moving your ERG forward. So without further ado, let me introduce my esteemed panelists. Okay, to my right is Sara Abiusi. That's right. Thank you. Is the Deputy Client Delivery Lead and Quality Lead for Accenture Federal Services, responsible for the delivery of all client-facing work for Accenture. She previously spent 25 years supporting and delivering large, complex technology modernization programs for civilian and state and local public service clients. Next to her is Harish Hemmige, I hope I said that right, who is a managing director and senior partner of BCG, in addition to being the president and CEO of BCG Federal Corp, a wholly owned subsidiary of BCG focused on the U.S. federal government. And next to him is Xihao Hu, responsible for the global finance team across multiple jurisdictions, supporting various lines of business, managing capital and liquidity, and overseeing financial management and regulatory reporting and related internal controls. He currently leads the Enterprise Visibility Minority Pillar under the TDBG Inclusion and Diversity Leadership Council. And last but not least is Jenny Kim Park, who is the head of diversity and inclusion for the Global Technology Operations, Global Strategy and Enterprise Platforms and Staff Support Functions at Bank of America. So let's give them all a round of applause. Okay, so to set the stage following their great bios and careers, what I'm going to ask each of the panelists to do is just, again, state their name, their role with the ERG, and just give some high-level statistics of their ERG, for example, how long have they been in existence and how many members they have. So, Sara, let's start with you.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sara Abiusi. As she mentioned, I'm actually part of our federal market unit, which is essentially also a wholly owned subsidiary of Accenture. But I have a role within Accenture. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't. So I got it. You got it? Sorry. Apologies. Forgot to hit the button. Sara Abiusi. So I'm part of our federal business, but I also have a role within Accenture corporately, where I'm the Asian Pacific American Employee Resource Group executive sponsor across the U.S. So in terms of how our ERG is structured, we are a fairly federated organization. I think we have probably 30 or 40 offices in the U.S. Out of those offices, we actually have 27 local ERGs. And when I think about local ERGs, what I mean by that is it's a community-based organization. It's people getting together, having a high-touch engagement model there. But then what my job is essentially is I bring it all together at the senior level. So we have also a centralized group that's focused on core professional development programming, mentorship programs, as well as key events or key moments in the calendar. So we run a full leadership summit once a year. We are responsible, of course, for Asia Pacific American Heritage Month, as well as many other things we do, whether it be key leaders talking about things. In terms of timeline, we're fairly mature. We've been around since 2000. But you know, when I mentioned the 27 different local ERGs, those come and go sometimes. And it's, you know, it's almost like college, right? You think about like groups starting up because there's passion. So groups start up, and actually probably over the last 4 or 5 years, we've had 4 or 5 more that have added. And it usually is just a phone call to say, hey, I want to start something. And I'm, of course, happily say, wonderful, here's what we need to do. So it's really, really great to see, while we have our core group, like New York is clearly our biggest ERG just per capita and number of people, but we've started something in Tallahassee even recently. So we definitely have some interest in smaller pockets and smaller locations in the United States as well. So we have over 10,000 people who identify as Asian Pacific American in the United States. Out of that, about 5,000 people are part of the ERG. So that means, you know, distribution groups, people meeting, also not just in the local ERGs, but people that are in locations that might not have a local ERG are actually participating in nationally run like events that essentially my team runs. So while we have all the local ERGs, we also have a very strong national presence. I probably have 30 people that basically are part of our national team that are across segments as mental health, professional development, community outreach, partnerships, etc. So we try to make sure that we have enough hands and go to people's passions, if you will, of what they're really interested, and we're fairly flexible in sort of changing that both locally and nationally.
Great. Harish, I am at BCG. I've been there for 19 years in total. I lead our Asian Diversity Network's kind of social impact efforts for the leadership team. And for us, we have really existed about a decade or so, but in that decade really started with affiliation and expanding our efforts across other verticals over time, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But really for us, it was about engaging the employee base. We have nodes at every office in North America, and we do a lot of central programming from the center, but then activation at individual offices based on those nodes. So I'll hand it over.
Sure. Is on? Yeah, my name is Xihao. I'm the CFO for Securities. So it's in Toronto. It's a Canadian company, and we have presence in the U.S. as well. So our ERG group is setting up a little bit differently from others. So grassroots-wise, especially the Chinese employee group started probably 25 years ago. And it's all started because people like to eat. You know, you gotta have a banquet and whatnot. So I think it started with like 10, 20 people just going out for eating for Chinese New Year. Now, actually, the Chinese New Year banquet is happening this Saturday, March 2nd in Toronto. It's 1,500 people. Our CEO, our CFO at the bank group level, we're all attending together with other leaders. So it's becoming like an event, phenomenal every single year. And then each of the Asian community have its own BRG. So we have Chinese, have Filipino, have South Asians, blah, blah, blah. And then 2.5 years ago, it feels like sometimes the different Asian BRG groups are fighting for resources, and sometimes they're conflicting in terms of objectives and goals. So one of the guys, I believe from South Asian BRG group, had raised the question, say, why don't we just come together? Having individual ones and having your own traits and characteristics, but also bring one together called Pan-Asian BRG. And I'm the executive sponsor for that Pan-Asian BRG. So it's actually good to bring all the issues that's common to everyone to the table. So one of the most important items is actually advancement of Asian professionals within the organization. TD actually did a pretty good job at the Toronto level. Our bank group had 13 leadership members, including the CEO. 5 are Asians, 3 Indian Asians, 1 Korean Asian, and the other one is Vietnamese Asian at the top level. So that's pretty good. But then you look at the next level, the succession plan, the Asians are kind of falling off the cliff. There's no immediate candidate that can succeed those guys. So we want to make sure that not only we at the top level showing a statistic that's really good, but also at every level we have succession for advancement into the top level. So that's one of the goals for the Pan-Asian group. It's about over 2,000 member, so it's pretty big. Canadian side is much more developed than the US side. The US probably started about 10 years ago, so not as good, as mature as the Canadian side, so we're working on that. And then we also affiliate with another organization outside of the TD called Ascend. There's Ascend in US and Ascend in Canada. TD actually is the founding member of Ascend in Canada, so we always like organized activities and the stuff with Ascend on both sides of the border. And the other thing I think that the BRG group did pretty well is, since I'm chairing the Diversity Council for the pillar on visible minorities, so our plan every year, we bring the BRG group together into Diversity Council and talk about their objective and our objectives and push it together. So it's grassroots, but with sponsor from the corporate members.
Hello everyone, I'm Jenny Park. I'm with Bank of America. My role, particularly for our Asian Leadership Network, is I am the executive sponsor across the bank's Asian Leadership Network. I also sit on our Asian Advisory Council, which is made up of about 20 of the most senior Asian American executives across the bank. I would say ours is also quite mature. Our Asian Leadership Network has been in tow for about 20 plus years. We have almost 20,000 members across all of our Asian Leadership Network bases, and our chapters are growing every day. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, we introduced our Richmond, Virginia chapter, and we're about to launch our EMEA Asian Leadership Network chapter, which is actually pretty exciting for me to see our growth overseas. I would say there's really not a lot of difference between what all of you have shared in terms of mission, strategy, how we approach. I'm actually kind of curious, are all of you a part of an Asian leadership or Asian network or any network at your company? Just quick raise of hands out of curiosity. Okay, cool. So I think a lot of maybe our base you're already familiar with, but looking forward to sharing a little bit more today with you.
No, and I love this conversation, so thank you all. Who in the room is the senior sponsor? Because I love that each of you said that you're a senior leader in the organization, number one, so kudos, woo, woo, for Asian excellence. But number two, that you're also giving back and being involved by representing and advancing the agenda for not only Asian Pacific Islander employees, but all employees broadly. Who in the room are sponsors of your ERG or allies? Okay, not as many. So we gotta move that needle. And I think that kind of keys off of what the first panel was talking about in terms of allyship and coming together, that we're stronger together, and how do we pull each other up the chain as we are moving up the ladder as well. So at JPMorgan Chase, and shout out to my JPMorgan colleagues here in the room, I see a few of you. We have a very established BRG. We started in 1990 at Chase, Heritage Chase, and I would say also started like Xihao in Fun Flag and Food, and pivoted over the years to really align to business goals. And where we are at this stage of maturity, we have 33,000 employees in the United States that self-identify as Asian. About 20,000 of them are members of our Asian BRG, which is called Aspire. So we have a healthy, membership. And what we're trying to do is really harness the power of the BRG in order to drive our business forward, whether that's through business growth and entrepreneurship, financial health, engaging with our community, or helping each other in terms of careers and skills. So I'd love to take this conversation to Harish, because BCG did this really good study on professionals, Asian professionals in the workplace. And we can use that as a launching point to say, from your data, how are each of you using your ERGs to kind of advance, right? Because everything that we do is based in data, right? Everything is data driven. So why don't we talk a little bit about your study and how you're using that as a launching point from a professional development standpoint in order to move the needle.
No, that's great. We had done a number of qualitative interviews, as well as we surveyed over 1,000 Asian American professionals to understand perceptions in the market, how people feel, where they are succeeding, where they feel challenges, and it was really eye-opening in terms of putting data and facts to what a lot of people feel. And what we saw in the data was 32% of people expressed a desire to be part of management, yet only 19% felt they had a fair opportunity to do so. And that was the largest disconnect between the desire and belief you actually had a chance to do so from any group. And so from that, we started to unpack and understand, well, what are some of these factors that are underlying it? And mentorship levels and levels of satisfaction for mentorship for Asian Americans were consistently lower than other groups. Feedback in terms of qualitative and quantitative feedback that they were receiving were 2x higher, more negative than many other folks for both hard and soft skills. And you look at that and you say, okay, there's a number of factors at play here that are really impacting Asian Americans. And we looked at other data and we found about 3% Asian American representation at the executive level, but much higher levels of representation in middle management, which speaks to this bamboo ceiling concept that I think many of us have seen. And so our ERG, as we looked at the data, we said, our origins were really around affiliation, but we said we want to do BCG, we want to be more than mooncakes. We want to give more to people. Let's focus actually from a primary pillar around affiliation to a secondary pillar around advancement. How do we then support Asian Americans in our workforce, which 24% of BCG North America is Asian American, so it's a very, very large, important constituent group. How do we make sure we're taking our own medicine and making sure we're giving advancement opportunities for folks, mentorship opportunities, folks like myself, who've been from 19 years, are heavily engaged, all the way to new hires that we have, and in giving people an opportunity to be able to ask questions in an open place, getting broader leadership, not just Asian American leadership, but overall North America chair to be able to get engaged. She kicks off our North America Asian Diversity Network meeting every year. She is heavily engaged in local affiliation events, the office heads, etc. So it's not just us talking in a vacuum, but trying to be able to actually get broader engagement, to be able to change those narratives, publishing this data, tracking the data ourselves to hold ourselves accountable. So I think that's really the pillar for us, as we look at our ERJ going beyond the affiliation piece, which is important. We need to give connectivity to folks, drives affiliation, connection, retention for our employees, but also ensuring that for those who want to aspire for more, for those who want to create opportunities to move up in the organization, that we create platforms to do so.
Yeah, and Sara, how is this playing out in your organization and the role that you play as a senior sponsor?
Yeah, so I think many of the themes are the same. I think there's a few things going on. I think in the wake of the pandemic, coming back to work is a huge thing, I think, for everybody. And all of us know that personal relationships are important to progression. So getting people back in the office and actually creating that high touch is really, really important. What's really hard, I think, with this new generation of people coming in the workforce is figuring out how you communicate the importance of that and value of that. And I've not figured this out, not cracked it up, but I think getting leaders back in the office and showing those individual touch points to say, I made an impact because of this, and having people feel it and that word of mouth is really sort of taking root. So I mentioned that annual leadership summit I mentioned. One of the things was the pillars was we were going to focus on a few key national program items, but really the focus was going to be what community could we build locally. And actually, it was the biggest turnout event. We had an amazing response. And not just in the moment, it wasn't just about the dim sum or Diwali and that stuff. It was really about, I got input. I got to meet a senior leader. I now know people. I now know this additional network of people I can leverage, both Asian and non-Asian. Right. So that was the first thing. The second thing I'd say is, in the wake of the pandemic, a number of Asian leaders sort of stepped up and said, okay, I've been sort of a watcher for a very long time on what's going on, and there was sort of this, historical dichotomy here of I made it on my own, everybody else should make it on their own. And I think that pivoted a bit to okay, I'm not going to watch anymore, I want to give back. And so what can we do? And actually there was sort of a coalescing of leadership that said, now what can we do as a firm? And to the firm's credit, we went to them and had this conversation about real life issues that people were feeling, both safety things actually in urban environments, as well as just professional development and all kinds of things. And the firm took notice. And along with North American ID, and Yolanda's here, we've now a North America steer co of senior leaders at what we call our marketing level, which essentially is our geographic sections, there's like 4 of them. And we talk about these significant issues that we're having to face and trying to tackle. While the ERG is there to essentially help support and gather information, this is another step. It's sort of in the evolution of actually trying to institutionalize programming and real change that we're working with IND and North America leadership. And when I mean North America leadership, I mean the business entities. So I think one of the like during the pandemic, sort of the realization I had for myself was, I talked about many of these things for years, but I was talking to basically the people that already knew it. And what did we have to do to sort of spread the message and talk to people who don't know, and in a constructive, proactive way? You know, I always felt the concern about, like, I don't want to be the squeaky wheel all the time, but sometimes you need to ask for what you want. So I give the firm credit for doing that, and I think one of the real huge steps we've made is having this steer code that's thinking about the, you know, those key tenets that we want to affect at the senior levels, as well as then having a really strong ERG to support this.
Just
Yeah, I was just gonna call on you, by the way. So,
perfect timing.
yeah, excellent. And like, so let me throw out a question and then you can continue.
Sure.
I'd love to know, because I think you're the only one that has like Canadian and US contingent, like the cultural differences, because you were saying that the Canadian part is a little bit more established, like the cultural differences across countries, but go ahead.
I think the Canadians probably, I would say, a little bit more proactive. One is the population of Asian Canadians are much larger in proportion in Canada versus in US. And just to give you one stat, in the finance department, it's a little bit stereotyping, but it's true. More than 50% of our employees in finance across the globe, especially in Canada, is are Asians. So there are a number of countries that are very good at doing that.
We're not good at math. Don't be the stereotype.
So I think in Canada, the grassroots movement are a little bit more active. They're pushing the envelope a little bit, since we have so many number of countries, so we should have proportional leaders as well. So currently, you know, I said 5 out of 13, maybe we should have 7 out of 13 are Asian leaders at the top of the house. If we have 50%, why not? We carry that 50% all the way through. So one of the complaints, similar to what Harish was saying, is the Asian Americans or Asian Canadians didn't quite get opportunity for some of the advancement program the company set up for. One is the seats are limited because it is only for top talent. You have to cover all the bases for everybody. The second is that the Asian Americans sometimes a little bit shy. They don't always put up their hand. They're not always out there. So a couple of years ago, we started just have a separate program under the now rebranded as Multicultural Network, which is the Visible Minority Pillar. We call it Minority and Leadership. It's a separate program for our minority folks, especially for Asian folks, to join in. Even small things, training, like how to break a conversation. I don't like going to a big conference. I hate to talk to people because I don't like to break the ice. I want people to talk to me. But you know what? Not everyone likes me. They don't always come to me to talk to me. So how do I break the ice? Like even small things like that in a training could be helpful to our Asian employees. And the other one is we do some capstone projects towards the end of the program, and the winner of that capstone project get to present to the senior level, all the way to the set level, which is our CEO and their direct reports. So you don't always get the exposure. So if you do a good job and in the capstone project, you present very well in front of the CEO, you may just get an extra call for something else down the road. So it just creates some momentum, some excitement amongst our Asian professionals, trying to raise the profile a little bit, give them a chance to be exposed to get to that next level.
I love that. And maybe, Jenny, you can talk about, as Sara was talking about, like the SteerCo and aligning to business goals. You had mentioned in our prep session that there's an Asian Business Council. So this is like almost like the next derivative of taking, you know, ERGs and the focus on particular communities and how it actually becomes part of the overall fabric of the organization. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
So I guess let me bring it home for a second, since we're sitting in New York, right? 1 in 4 businesses, I think the last time I checked, was actually Asian owned. If you didn't know that, it's pretty staggering statistic. I was shocked when I heard it, as an Asian living here. And then all of a sudden you walk into businesses and you're like, oh yes, every 1 in 4 makes sense. But if you think about that and you think about the impacts of, you know, even the generations before, like my parents were small business owners, several people in my family are small business owners. They don't work in corporate America like I do, right? And that's how we were grown and how we were raised. But you also tie that to what we do as companies. At the end of the day, we have a product that we're trying to get out. We have a customer base. We have a community that we're trying to serve. And so if you think about how do you tie sort of all this together? How do you serve the people in your company, right, from a cultural inclusion perspective? How do you serve your client base? And how do you grow the wealth of the community? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. One of the things that we launched was the Asian Business Council, and we launched it actually, I think in DC first, and it's now in San Francisco, LA, New York, and it continues to expand. The Asian Business Council actually utilizes the employee network. It also connects in with the Asian Advisory Council, the senior most body, to reach out to help drive Asian, American, and Asian business growth, so that we can have a place both from a community perspective that we're helping our small business owners and our medium and large business owners grow, but we're also really just driving the full 360 of what a company can offer for the community. So that's maybe an example. Just to go back though on one thing that Harish said, I think it's really interesting, and no one I think in our community would be surprised that, the reality is we do, and many minority communities feel this, right? There are stereotypes that you're trying to always sort of kind of break, and it's incredibly difficult to do. And I think I was actually pretty surprised. We were chatting in the back, and we were all saying, not all of us, but a majority of us didn't join an ERG until we were like at the executive level. I didn't join an ERG until I had an executive title already. And I think, Sara, you might mention that. I think Xihao, you said the same thing. And so if you think about this, you take a step back, I would really encourage all of you, if you know of senior Asian executives at the companies that you work, that you ask them to join the ERGs, because it's people in the executive seats that can help break stereotypes, and that can help catalyze and really all of the initiatives that we're hearing today. The reason why they work is because you have Asian executives and allies, but really Asian executives on top of it to help break stereotypes and push the needle. Last week we did an event with Frank Chi, who was the director of 38 at the Garden and Insanity. And there was something that he said that I really loved, and he sort of said, Jeremy Lin, who, if you don't know, well, does anyone not know Jeremy Lin? You don't have to confess it.
All you non-New Yorkers, we'll give you a pass.
So Jeremy Lin, he was, obviously like a very great basketball player, but he's always been a very strong basketball player, even in high school and as he was getting recruited and that kind of thing, and he had all the right grades and he was winning all these championships, and recruiters kept passing over him, and they kept saying he passes the ball too much, he's too passive, all of the Asian stereotypes that you're just like, please no, right? And it was happening to him, and then there was somebody else who actually gave him the opportunity because they saw him play against his son. It was the head coach of the Warriors. And I just think about that story because it really reminds us that we all have a role, no matter what level in the organization, but really at the executive level, to really push the needle on helping to, number one, break stereotypes, number two, narrative change, very important, right? And number three is to really encourage everybody to do the 360 on the Asian community. So whether it's internally, whether it's for business purposes, whether it's serving the community or whatnot.
We also talk about just to be present is important as well, like events that the company hold or the BRG hold. Really make time to carve out time on your calendar to be there. When you show up, it does make a difference, because if you don't show up, people notice that you didn't show up. Like, we have high levels, senior Asian executives, they never were at those events. So why the heck I should spend time in, building the BRG, building the strengths of the Asian communities within the company. So I think it's important to be present.
Yeah, I wanted to build on that topic. Not only to be present, right, because that sends a signal that it's important, right? And like as I asked before, like how many senior executives, are part of the BRG or leading the BRG? It's like you need to have more hands up because representation really matters. I always feel like, and it's any minority group, it's not just the Asian minority group, it's like, okay, the women, okay, let the women get together and talk about fixing their problem. Let the Asians get together and talk about fixing their problem. Let the blacks get together and so how do we come together as a community and bring other people along so that we are all advancing our collective agenda? You know, because it's not just the Asian people. I think that that's critically important, is have Asian leaders bring other people up the chain, but it's also as important to have allies alongside you, right, to bring people through the door as well. So would love to hear, like, how are you engaging others to come along and advance the agenda?
I think Priska said something earlier on the panel, which I just loved, which is like whatever initiatives, et cetera, you have, they really do serve everybody. And you know, I heard someone else speak yesterday, and something he said really resonated with me. He said, in order to serve your own community, and this was actually in context of everything that's going on in terms of hate, right? If you're trying to combat one form of hate, the best way to do it is to combat all forms of hate. And that's what I really think about in response to your question, Vivian, is that's how you have to do it. Yes, like of course, people in your own community, you have to serve your community. That's a non-starter. If people don't see you trying to serve your own community, there's no way other people not a part of your community are going to help you serve it, right? But the best way to do that is help others serve their community too. You know, so that's.
And also, I'd like, don't go it alone. Like, so first off, like you find people that are like-minded and bring them together. And it's much easier to communicate, convince, to say it's not just one person saying, it's not just Harish, but it's sort of all those things. And leaders are important because leaders are the people that know the game. There's something to be said about the unwritten rules of any company, because there are them. And if someone hasn't sort of shared that to you, finding those unwritten rules are super important to understand how leadership promotions work, how the game is played, and unfortunately there's a game in every situation, and hopefully someone imparts the knowledge and the mentoring to share how to play the game. And that's a super important thing, and that's what you get from mentoring and sponsorship and whatnot. But then once you get there, it's the people that know how to connect the dots. So those leaders are the ones that can sort of say, I know who the influencers are. Because not everybody, just because you're a leader does not mean you have the same influence.
Right.
So certain leaders are going to have a huge amount of influence, and you have 15 minutes or a dinner with them to talk about things and make it personal and make it specific on things. They're going to hear that. And they actually will tell you, here are some ideas on how we can move this forward. But if you're not having those relationships and making those connections, it's really hard to move your agenda forward. So in addition to just having the ERGs, individualized, intentional, like I think about this as a sales campaign sometimes, it's almost like you have a call plan. So who are the influencers that I want to engage with? Who's going to make the decisions? And those are things, if you can continue to sort of think about it in an intentional way, I think you then move the agenda forward. And honestly, I think becoming more intentional, not in a super structured way, it doesn't have to be like, we're not rigid in that regard, but having that intentionality can move your, and then you can also start to measure, like, how far have I gotten from this year to that year? What areas have I made progress? What business units? Which ones do I not? And therefore, you can continue to return and refine.
Harish? You're a different industry. Love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree with what you're saying, so I don't have a whole lot to add, to be honest.
I know before we got up on stage, we were talking about having 5 generations in the workplace, right? This is the first time that we have 5 generations in the workplace, and the expectation from each of those generations are all different, right? And we were talking about how we lean into the ERGs in order to, you know, coalesce and get people centered around a common cause, because it's difficult, right, if everybody comes in with their own perspective. So maybe just keying off of what Jenny said in terms of like business, like how are you using ERGs in your organization as like listening posts to then drive or improve employee satisfaction?
I mean, for us, we are a people business, and so especially given Asian Americans are 25% of our employee base in North America, like it's absolutely critical that we drive engagement, we drive affiliation, we drive retention in that pool of people. And so using the ERGs as a platform to make sure that, you know, people feel that sense of connectivity to the firm, to each other, We do an annual people survey, so every single employee fills it out. We have like 95+% adherence to it. We're running it right now, actually, and we cut every possible segment you can imagine in that data, and it's actually very interesting. In one of the questions we asked is, do you have a close friend at work? And we found people who respond as, strongly, very strongly, or strongly to that question have significantly higher retention rates over long periods of time. And so that, to us, was like a big light bulb of how do we make sure that people feel connectivity to each other, and using these ERGs as a platform to be able to ensure that we're investing in our people. So like, for us, like I said, we're an intellectual capital business, we're a people business. Being able to get the best and the brightest to feel like they can continue to perform and feel connected and we invest so much into them as BCG, we want to make sure that we can make sure we keep them so that we can deliver better for clients.
There's a lot of statistics around sort of like college graduates and maybe like college graduates from a couple years ago, and we were also talking about like in our generation, we didn't really look at diversity stats, whether there was an ERG, et cetera, when entering the workforce. I mean, I don't know how many of you were like, is there an Asian ERG before you decided you're gonna accept an offer, right? But here's the interesting thing about college graduates right now. They're looking to see if they have an ERG that affiliates with them. They're also looking at diversity. They're also looking at mental health services. Those are the kind of the top three that they're looking at. And it's fascinating. I actually see it like when we do, a couple of my colleagues are here at Bank of America, we do like kind of like a fair, if you will. When the college graduates enter, and it could be about like open a checking account, like whatever, a lot of different things. Our largest lines are always mental health, ERGs, always. And it's just, we could have a free food table and it's still, these two are the longest lines. So that really does say something, and I do think it's super important to just really invest in your ERGs, no matter how small or big your company is. In listening sessions, think about the rise in AAPI 8. For our company, the first thing we did, the first group we went to, was the Asian ERG, because that's where you go, where you know that there's allies and there's a group of people who probably need support in this moment. So I really liked what you said, Harish, but I do think generally, Vivian, that ERGs play an incredibly important role across all generations.
It's interesting. I had a conversation with a sophomore from Cornell yesterday. I talked to her because her dad and I were alumni from the university back home. So he won.
What?
So I went to.
Dice?
No, not love dice. I went to college in Shanghai for a year, alumni. So.
Oh, alumni! I'm sorry.
That's scandalous story. So her dad wants her to join TD because he thought it was a great bank, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, well, I haven't done my research yet, and I want to ask you a few questions. So one of the things she asked about was our ESG record, which includes diversity. She wants to know more about that before she decides if TD is worthwhile for her to apply for the job. And so I called her dad afterwards. I said, your girl is a little different from you. So that shows the generation differences. Yeah.
Anybody else? I think we're seeing a rise, though, also in the intersectionality across the ERGs. I mentioned we start in a mental health full vertical within the APA ERG, and it's incredibly, maybe it's the wrong word is popular, but the work we're doing there around how does stress impact Asians, especially in the youth, differently than it comes out in different minorities as well as the majority, is really, really interesting for me as like a mom, a teenager, but also just in general to think about how I see my junior teams coming up. And it's just what we're talking about and making the discussion open to talk about what the struggles are, whether it's your part of supporting someone that's going through an event or just trying to keep your physical well-being up so that you can be prepared, is something that we're really, really focused on, to the point like that probably we have an event every other month nationally just on that topic now, which again about 4 years ago we would never have been so consistent on it in the discussions that we're having on those topics. So I think a ton of intersectionality across interest groups and such is definitely happening as well.
Okay, I'd love to pivot to
rewards and recognition. I think that was brought up at the last conversation. What are each of your firms doing to reward and recognize your BRG, ERG leaders?
I can start. We do an annual diversity, inclusion, and volunteerism award. It's a pretty big deal. We also allow them to take money, each $1,000, to go and contribute to any charity of their choice. It's a complete nominated process, meaning they can nominate themselves, which I think is a great thing, but their colleagues can also nominate them, and we select about 100 of the top D&I volunteers across the firm, and we do a huge celebration. The CEO comes, we have external speakers, we have a marketplace, etc. That's one of the ways. We also nominate our ERG leaders frequently for external awards, whether it's like the Ascend Award, the NET Award, whatever it is. And I think that's really important. The recognition, I know in our culture, I would say we don't necessarily thrive on recognition, but once you have a taste of it, it's like, you want to go to that buffet. And it's so catalyzing for our community. So I would just say that's how we do it, but I would also catalyze all of you. Like if you see a group that you're affiliated with and they're going through a nominations process, nominate someone in the community, because it's so important. I think we pass up those opportunities way too much. So please do that.
Yeah, similar to us, like we actually had, so we have a WOW Awards in US in the retail bank, and then we all have reserved a certain slate every year for diversity related work. Not necessarily just specifically on BRG, but you get nominated within the BRG kind of community who has done a lot of contribution to that. So then you can bring your husband or wife, or some people bring mom and dad to join a fully paid 4-day kind of a nice resort vacation in a way. And then from there we also pick one winners to go to the top of the house. We call VIA Vision in Action Awards. So you get to meet the board members and the CEO at the TPG, the group level, to enjoy that recognition as well. So it's pretty exciting.
I was going to say you're going to get a lot of taps on the shoulder, like how do I join TV?
Yeah, I think we're quite similar. What you celebrate is a function of what you value.
Yeah.
And making sure that we celebrate folks who are disproportionately contributing, showing, and demonstrating the values and behaviors that we want our staff to be able to display is super, super important. And so whether it's at a local office level or at a national level, like with our, we've got our annual Asian American retreat coming up, like using that as a platform to be able to celebrate contributions that people make, and then things that people have gone on. We've had alumni come back and speak who have taken on huge roles at big companies. Someone who's one of the business presidents at Verizon, for example, had come back and spoken about the role that we played, like just making sure people feel and see, like, I can aspire to be more. I can see these behaviors that people who are doing that can be celebrated. I can be like that as a really important pillar, and and making sure we recognize that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm going to say the same, but I think we have a process that we run annually within IND that we basically identify the highest contributors to the ERG, and we actually submit them, and that actually shows up in rewards. So I mean, like financial rewards, not just like. We also have like self-nominated the Equality Awards, which are global, which essentially we can nominate both ERGs, individual leaders, and programs, which I think is really, really special because it's an opportunity for also you to share what you've done, but also share it to the senior leadership, and they actually talk about it and what's the impact. So I think like all same, and I think it goes to the point of part of this is also just making people feel special, and I think sometimes a few CEOs ago at Accenture, he came for a program I was running, and the client was the CEO of this organization, and after the meeting, he's like, I know what you want. You want to feel special. So let's just make people feel special, because even just that small things, it doesn't have to always be money, it doesn't always have to be that name. That's feeling someone said thank you, like gratitude, is super, super important, and we forget sometimes how important those things can be.
I love that. So I will have gratitude to this panel. Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time, and I know there's going to be a lot of questions. So Why don't we hand it over to the audience? But let's give a big hand to our panelists. Lots of hands in the room, please.
Yes. Hi, thank you for a wonderful conversation. So I'm a executive sponsor of the Asian ERG at AIG, and we're thinking about the importance of actually promoting the Asian community is really the Asian ERG to be able to provide the slate of candidates when the senior position actually comes up. So it's integral part of the HR process, right? That's what we would like to be. But it's anyone of you thinking about that way?
That's actually what we're striving for as well, and trying to mingle the process from ERG to the HR process, because I do think sometimes the normal, we call talent succession process, didn't always identify the strong Asian leaders. I think it needs a little bit of feedback from the community, as well as feedback from the business process, in combination trying to do that. As I said, if I look at the top, it looks really good, but then the next few levels, the supply chain for senior leader to succeed at the a CEO direct report table is a little bit thin. So that's an effort trying to beat that up.
Thank you.
Thank you again to the panelists. I'm over at Goldman Sachs in Global Markets. I'm also a leadership committee member in the New York, New Jersey chapter of our Diversity and Inclusion Asian Network. And personal privilege, I am a repeat attendee at this conference. So John, thank you for continuing to champion this platform for us. Appreciate that. So I think across the different sessions in this conference, we've talked about data and metrics, and then making data-driven decisions to support minority groups and champion the DEI cause, right? So I guess my question is, should more organizations come out transparently and report those metrics, even if they don't look pretty and they're difficult, on what DEI or minority engagement looks like in their organization, whether that's recruitment, people in C-suites, on leadership committees, whatever that may be. I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, which is, unless you know the state of play, how do you do anything about it? And whether you publish it or not, I think is an individual company decision, but from a management perspective, unless you can see it and have real grounded discussions around how people are doing, where they're succeeding, and where the gaps are, I don't know how you can manage thoughtfully without it. And so, to me, it's really critical and a differentiator to change the discussion to be one that can be fact-based and allow people to make strategic decisions, and you can't do that without data.
I find publicly, this is my personal view, publicly announce that the data, put a little bit of pressure on yourself, because you don't want to look bad at the end of the day, right? Everyone wants to look good, so when you have that out there and consistently publish it, and it will put some pressure on you to do more. For example, TD has a, not for Asian professionals, but for female, we want to get to 40% VP and above representation in the company. When the number gets close in some years, we get nervous, right? Because you're going to publish it and show people that you actually this year didn't meet the target. And so that put a lot more pressure. So now everyone is getting a buffer above that number out there. And so you can show year in, year out, you have progress and you actually achieve a certain number to make people feel comfortable that you are actually making progress.
Yeah, we do report out on something we call our human capital report in our annual report. So we do report numbers, we report who we engage with, et cetera. And I think, yes, it puts the pressure on, but I also think progress really does catalyze progress. And so if you're able to show your progress, or even if you're not having a great year, it's still, I think, a good step forward to be able to share those metrics. So I'm a very strong proponent of what gets measured gets done.
Because the contrast between glass half full and glass half empty.
Yeah, I mean, the context of measure what you treasure is right. That's sort of what I always think through, and having them externally present as goals, to the point, like, keep your feet to the fire. I also say it's looking at like companies and knowing that, right, the Department of Labor collects EEO data from all companies.
Yep.
You may not be aware of it, but if you're a public company, you have to submit, you're supposed to submit it. And then, various external organizations have created indexes on sort of what does good look like. So you can start to, like, if you have your own data, or you can actually look at like the published, like, generic or sanitized industry information, you can start to sort of get a sense of where you're trending, which I think is an interesting tool. It doesn't necessarily mean good or bad. Let me just say that, right? Because everything is a different standard. But it starts to make you think, and then you can look at how you're looking at your data internally and discuss it. And it's not just part of being a leader in the ERG or the IND space is you have to get the data, and you have to have these conversations in a very confidential way, because we don't want, data to be misused as well. So understanding how it is, how it's calculated, what you can use it for, and what are the big decisions and things you can take to improve things is a really, really hard conversation, and a really good one to have internally with the right people.
All right, and
Thank
with
you.
that, it's a wrap. Thanks again to my panelists. Thanks to John and his team. And thank you all for being such an engaged audience. We hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks again.